views. I think I feel like I've already spoken a lot, so I'd rather be. I don't want to. I just want to say thank you, and then maybe we can hear from other people.
Mary, please.
Thank you so much for very interesting matter. Thank you so much for the pressing matter.
Can you just introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Mary. I'm a PhD student here at the Buchmann Faculty of International Law. And shukran manan that you said everything we all wanted to say, but I'll keep my question theoretical for the academics. So I was wondering, there is this classic question of what came first, and obviously they go hand in hand, criminal justice and questions of democracy. If there is a democratic backsliding, there is an interest among a hypothetical ruling party being here to control the means of violence. On the other hand, the elements of the criminal justice system, if not treated, the case of Israel is a good case in point, creates some of the conditions for democratic backsliding. And I was wondering where do we start breaking the cycle?
So I guess my instinct is always to think that break a cycle in as many places simultaneously as you can, and that it would be a mistake just to try to pay attention to democratic backsliding without thinking about criminal justice, and it certainly would be a mistake just to think about criminal justice as your only way of dealing with democratic backsliding. So I think we need to attack all the different parts of the cycle at the same time. Because I do think because I think that, and part of the reason for that is connected with the difficulty of figuring out which came first. And the reason why it's difficult to figure out which came first is that the lines of causation go both ways, and that's why I think it's important to attack both at the same time. I don't know if Professor Kremitzer or Professor Toti Brown want to comment on that.
I would like to add something to what I heard from Anal. I think there is a political side here. Why this policy came about. And the reason is to say that Palestinians don't have a real reason for resistance. They are small children who are incited by other people, and therefore they resist. But they don't have any reason for this. So this is the politics providing a good reason, according to the people who have this policy, to Palestinian resistance. They are being incited. And when I hear the story that you told us about, I think that maybe the Americans were right in their position to free speech. You know that we did not follow the American position. We followed the Canadian position, the European position. So freedom of speech is very important, but not as important as in the United States. And my conclusion from here is that you can write carefully the laws about incitement as you wish. At the end of the day, the wording does not matter. When people express themselves in ways that the majority feels offensive, when it hurts you in the stomach, the result will be police investigation, arrest, etc., etc. And from the point of view of the government, the fact that nothing will come out of it, the person is released, the person is acquitted, it's no problem, because the harassment effect was already accomplished. So once you open the door, what I'm trying to say is that once you open the door, you invite on your head this reaction that speech that is being considered that makes the majority angry this is enough to put law into enforcement. And I'm saying this with some sadness, because I was one who recommended to move away from the American position. And maybe it was the wrong move.
Can I just answer? No, I find it sometimes troubling to compare all the time with the United States, especially in the issue of freedom of speech and incitement during and the policy of the Attorney General, especially in emergency times, because all the time people keep reminding us of what happened after the September 11th. So the United States is not always a good example of how to behave in emergency times and in war. It's on the contrary, it's an example of what not to do. But also the comparison is a bit problematic, because, as I said before, I didn't accidentally enter the issue of citizenship, but there's another issue, which is identity, not only citizenship. So in Israel, it's the issue of citizenship and identity, or the double identity of the Palestinian citizens in Israel, adding to that the political conflict, which complicates things much more than having the history of slavery and statuses of economic and social issues and so on. But we have also this burden on top of everything. And it's not only the September 11th, so in every, I just said a sentence about it, a lot of landmark events like Yom El-Ad in 76, where six citizens were killed. This is some sort of similar to the United States, but still we're not talking about urban riots in the same sense in the United States. It's not really urban. October 2000, killing of another 11 citizens. So when we talk about Israel and the United States, we should pay much more attention about what is in common and what is difference between them, what the difference is between them. And another thing is that what not to learn from the United States context.
Please.
So you mentioned the legacy of penal populism in the U.S., and you mentioned our Jewish supremacist Minister of Security and the problems of over-policing and under-policing Palestinian towns, which he encourages. And I think you understood them as analogous, but I think there are causal connections between them. And the causal link is the American Rabbi Kahana, who shrewdly leveraged the tough on crime rhetoric that emerged in the 60s, exactly at the time when he forged his political consciousness and then imported it to Israel. And it took a generation for us to realize, we still do not realize the extent of his sway, I think, over our political discourse. But a generation later, we are beginning to realize that. And so what I'm wondering is whether the importation or exportation or influence of the pathologies of American penal populism over other places in the world plays any role in your understanding of the relationship between criminal justice and democracy, because America is a democracy, a struggling democracy, but it's also an empire in decline, and there are causal links between the way that it thinks about this connection and what goes on in other places in the globe. And so perhaps your view of democracy as not what the people think, but the procedural mechanisms that we ought to have in place addresses that. But what I'm curious about is whether that plays any conscious role in your thinking about that connection.
It hasn't, but you're making me think that it should. So I have to say that I had never thought about the way in which Meir Kahane served as a bridge between tough on crime policies in the United States and the emergence of Jewish supremacism here in Israel. That does seem to me worth thinking about, and it's definitely true that American policies on crime, the American politics of crime have been exported to a number of other countries, certainly the United Kingdom, and I was happy to hear Professor Kremnitzer say that it's not a part of politics here in Israel, but I did think when I heard you say that you shouldn't be complacent about that. I feel like I just feel that democracy depends on people. Well, I think it's important to address concerns about security, both because democracy depends on people feeling secure, and because rhetoric about security is often such a big part of right-wing movements. It's a big part of Trump's campaign this year, even though rates of homicide have been dropping sharply for the last 2 years in the United States. So I guess I hadn't thought about that connection, but your comment makes me think that I should.
Just a small follow-up on that point. So I generally speaking agree with Moses' point about this not being very high on the political agenda in Israel, but I actually, when you spoke, what I thought about Ben-Gvir and his campaign was exact, and he's an avid follower of Meir Kahane, and he brought this to
Ben-Gvir
here the last campaign, and he got a lot of votes when they looked at when there was a survey of people who voted for him. There was a large part of his constituency who belonged traditionally to left-wing, kibbutzim, moshavim, left-wing parties who voted for him because of this tough on crime agenda. So I think I completely agree with you, and I think the link is much more explicit than one would like to think between Meir Kahane, Ben-Gvir, and exactly this tough on crime agenda that became very, very influential in the last election.
Two thoughts. Thank you, all of you. You made me think a lot about David's talk. I thought that there was an imbalance in the theory that you gave about the criminal theory, criminal law theory. You were very sophisticated in the sense of opposing, just a view of security as just talk and false, and to show that we have to look at it as a real concern and also as abusive sometimes, and only in this way we will learn. But when you talked about democracy and populism, you kept on putting aside that popular will, all of this has nothing. It's only about, and I think that especially in Israel, from what I know, there were serious concerns about groups, as Mota were talking about, because Israel is an ethnic democracy, ethnic groups that felt not part of it, and how is it, so I think unless we address the real concerns of groups that just to say populism and popular will, and it's two sides of democracy, just to define democracy as totally unconnected to popular will helps you to have an elegant solution, but it doesn't help you capture the complexity, I think, of this. So that's just a general. But connecting these things to Israel, I think there is something structural in Israel, maybe also in the United States, that came out very strongly in Manal's talk. When Mother was talking for the first time, groups in Israel realized that they will never be again in the ruling, and that the ruling parties know it. So I think the Arab minority knows it all along. That's the structure, and not only that, it is connected to citizenship. If the citizenship in Israel is built on two kinds of citizenship, on the citizenship that one group is completely doesn't have any faith in the system, they know that it is meant to put them outside. I think the whole discussion of these problems of how to get trust in the system, we act on opposite assumptions. There is opposite assumptions by different groups about trust and interest, and that makes the theory even more difficult to apply, because it works differently for different groups. So I'll stop here.
So those are both very interesting and helpful comments. So let me talk first about the way in which I simplified democracy. I think you're right, I do that. I have a explanation for it. Maybe it's not a justification, but I feel like there are lots of different ways of thinking about democracy, and each is, when viewed in its own, each one taken on its own is reductive and incomplete. But I think that right now we are in a moment where popular sovereignty, honoring the popular will, is such a bad and pernicious way to think about democracy that it's worth doubling down on a pluralist approach to democracy. I hear you to be saying, Leora, that the danger there is that there's some aspirations that I'm ignoring, and and just saying that we need to have a pluralist system doesn't do enough to address what it is some people want from democracy, and that could be right. I need to think about that. I think that's I definitely think you're right.
There is a history in the United States of that. It doesn't begin with Trump, of populist sovereignty and the way they attack. So when you look at it, if you consider Trump, it's as if this is the only problem. But this history makes sense to
yeah.
But I think it's worth looking into this.
Yeah. So then I wanted to say something also about the second comment you made about the place of Palestinians in Israeli society. So I do think that it's hard. It's very hard to have a democracy when some citizens are second-class citizens. I think that.
I just said not completely excluded from the political.
So I think that's a serious problem for Israeli democracy, and I think that one of the as an outsider, I feel like the idea that Israel is an ethnic democracy is a problem, and it has always seemed to me as an outsider that Israel is both. There are aspects of Israel's history that are unique. There are aspects of Israeli democracy that are unique, but it helps to take an outside perspective also, to appreciate what's unique here, but also to think about what's common. And it is true that that Israel's history creates some complications for thinking about what it means to have a pluralist democracy. But it's also true that the Israeli Declaration of Independence promised that. And so you have, like, every country has a complicated legacy, different strands of its legacy, and it just, as an outsider, it seems to me that's one of the challenges here.
My name is Ben, I'm a doctorate student here, and I have two points I want to raise, separate points. The first one is about the whole discussion about populism, and what the populism and popular sovereignty, and you mentioned the jury system in the US, and as you know, we don't have a jury system. I also used to be a criminal defense lawyer, and it seems even it seems like obscure to have a jury system, and it seems like in Israel we have Professor Kremlitz has mentioned, we have a very professional bureaucratic system with bureaucratic judges and bureaucratic attorneys, and a jury system brings in this idea of popular will into the criminal justice system. But when you think, the good side of the popular sovereignty, but we're talking about the whole threat of populism, wouldn't that be a problem when you think about it?
The jury system.
The jury, yes, because I would think of, let's say, think of, let's say, the Israeli system, you bring the jury system, and there will be the Jewish or Arabs, and there will be the final judges against, and the issue of discrimination will just link into the whole system itself. Without, we have a professional bureaucracy that is they're required to impartiality. And the jury system is doing everything.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And I've been thinking about the jury system a lot because my doctorate project is about the adversarial system, and it's something we have an adversarial system, but we don't have a jury system, and it's something we're thinking about. Another aspect, a completely different aspect, is about what's like the recent not only security crisis in Israel, but also what Minerva talked about, the police enforcement, the discriminatory enforcements against our population, against also not only against speech-related offences, but also in demonstrations. But when I come to think, the problem is not only about police enforcement, it's also the problem is when we have such a, let's say, security threat, sometimes you can see that many different own institutions, official institutions, they all come to be aligned with the same agenda. And I mentioned that eventually we figure out these speech-related offences that the police brought requested arrest warrant, and 80% of the requests were given by the courts. And there was even a famous case where a high school teacher was arrested for about a week, and retrospectively the state attorney said he wouldn't have put such a case to the court, but the court authorized the arrest. So when you come, I think one of the main problems you have to figure out the system where the checks and balances work, and these are the checks and balances didn't work.
Because we have 10 minutes to go, I'd like to take a few more comments and then give you the opportunity to react. Please.
My name is Minerva. And when you talked about the different definitions of democracy, I was thinking about the term or the concept of the republic. And I was just wondering, when you think republic or republican approach, there is, I think, more emphasis on civil, not just on civil rights, but also on civil duties, and on the concept of solidarity, perhaps. So I'm just wondering, how do you see the role or potential of the criminal justice system?
To further a Republican theory of democracy?
The republics, like republican. Not a democracy, but a republic. And so I was just wondering if this different concept helps us in a way, if we think about the role of the criminal justice system in promoting ideas of citizenship or solidarity, perhaps. I mean, it's that like different concept has a certain value. We don't think of perhaps a certain type of regime as a liberal democracy, but
Anyone else?
My name, I'm Shelly Basmark. I'm the PhD candidate here in my question is, how does voting and election rules, regulation, publicity around voting systems that tap into that? Because one of the things that the people need the reassurance that they have a state, they can influence the voices are heard, right? They have a seat at the table to me. So in democracy as an institution for inclusive dissent, but often where most of the election systems as your is rigged. And the popular vote, actual popular vote in not an elected president, but somebody else is elected president, isn't some features of that election system rigged is practice of democracy and
So yes, I think it's fair elections and elections that are seen as fair are an essential ingredient of a democracy, and this is actually another way in which the criminal justice apparatus is important for democracy, because the police are responsible if there is an effort to frustrate the implementation of the election. The police have to protect the results of the election. That happened in the United States. It happened in Brazil. So I do think it's, and I agree with you that when Donald Trump keeps saying that the system is rigged, it's a large threat to democracy. Because people feel that there's no such thing as a fair election. It's just all a question of who's going to, in whose favor the election will be rigged. That's very dangerous. With regard to the idea of Republican citizenship, I actually think that's what juries in the United States can help to foster. I know that juries seem bizarre from Israelis. Do they seem bizarre to you, Yoav, also?
Not to me, because I also practiced a little bit in the States.
Yeah.
And I can also see the advantages. But I think for many people, they do seem bizarre.
But it's a colonial tradition here in Israel.
It's a what?
A colonial tradition.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is exactly because it was not a democracy. It's a colonial power that doesn't trust the peoples. That's why we don't have the jury.
No, actually, the mirror image of that is that we don't have a jury system because we were a mandate.
Yeah.
And the British did not want the...
That's what she said.
That's
Yeah.
what she said. So they did not want the British to participate. So because of the... Okay, so...
That's exactly
So,
The lack of juries is a colonial
but I...
feature.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So, but I don't think that juries are a vehicle for introducing populism into American criminal justice. The first and most important fact about how juries work in the United States is that they almost always reach the same result that a judge would reach. So you could think that means that they don't do any good because a judge would reach the same result. But they do a lot of good for the people who serve as jurors, and they force those people to take some ownership of criminal justice. They force those people to engage in reasoned discussion with people that they disagree, who may come from different backgrounds than they do, and they have to work together to figure out what the answer is in a case. And for many people, actually, this may be an even more important fact about jury service in the United States. Almost everybody who serves as a juror in the United States has a higher opinion of the jury system after they've served than before. It's a very large fact. People who've served on juries leave thinking the jury system is and I include myself in that. I was a juror when I was in college, and I left it thinking this is a much better system than I thought. It is true that juries can sometimes result in populism of the worst sort. That you'll have a jury that's unrepresentative or that only represents the majority, and then you have a member of a minority group who's being prosecuted for a crime, and they'll convict even though the evidence is weak. But every system has problems, and I think cases like that are not the norm in the United States. They're sufficiently common that we need to worry about them. But I don't think that they would be I don't think they would be a reason to try to cut back on the jury system. And there's very little support for that in the United States. There's a lot of support for, there's no support for cutting back on the jury system in criminal cases in the United States. There isn't enough support, in my view, for strengthening the jury system and making it real. What you would want in Israel, if you had a jury system, and I have no idea whether that's even something is that something that people even talk about?
To introduce the jury system to Israel? Not really.
Yeah. So you wouldn't want just a jury of Jewish Israelis deciding the case. That wouldn't be a real jury. But if you had a jury where you had Palestinian Israelis and Jewish Israelis, and Haredim, that would be a real jury. And I don't know how many occasions you have when you have where you have a group of Haredim and Jewish, secular Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Israelis coming together and having to work together to figure out.
Sitting in a law that is not the Torah law. Are you crazy?
And with women.
With women.
That's the problem, see?
Yeah, or maybe not Haredim, but ultra-Orthodox,
exactly republicanism needs duties like this and that. So we put out Haredim and Arabim.
Yeah.
We'll get to the...
Yeah.
Two sentences. One, following Liora, I think in a theory of democracy, one has to pay attention to the role of the majority. It has a place there. What should be resisted is to make it the one and only and exclusive principle of democracy. But it is part of the democratic idea. It's an important part of the democratic idea.
Yeah.
And the second point that I would like to make, in the legacy of Kahana, we also owe him the fact that it is impossible to deny Israel as a Jewish state. And I think many troubles came from this basic law that we have in the Knesset. This was an offshoot of the Kahana thing that we wanted to prevent, racist incitement, but some of the politicians wanted something on the other direction, and since then it is, if you say I object that the state should be a Jewish state, then you are out of the political game. And I think this causes a lot of problems to Israeli democracy on one hand, and on the other hand, it's impossible to get rid of it.
Yeah. So I want to say that I think that the idea that the election should be decided by a majority vote is different from the idea that democracy amounts to implementing the popular will, because if you're, I think, under a pluralist account of democracy, it's also important to have elections that are decided by majority vote. But it's important just because there's no better or more neutral way to decide who wins an election. So it's the difference is between seeing a majority vote as just the most neutral way we have of deciding who's going to win an election where there are people with different views, and thinking that majority vote is a way to implement the popular will. And the second, I just think, is always a simplification, and it's a dangerous simplification right now.
Yeah, just a sentence. I have to say that I'm still echoed with your comment about structural exclusion in the political system. But there's another structure that it also connects with what you said before. There's transparent and apparent structure, exclusionary structure. So the political system is kind of an easy case. But when we talk about the courts, I did my training during October 2000. And I was in the court when the judge told me, because the Supreme Court extended arrest until the end of the procedure, so he had to do it for a 12 years old boy, the age of my boy, without his family in the courtroom, for throwing a stone, right? Not for. But because this is a more structured but transparent exclusion that comes in times, and this is what I wanted to make, in times of war and emergency, in times when you know who is kind of the enemy and who's in and who's outside, who is the outsider and who is part of the community. And this is one of the major problems of ethnic democracy, which is, I think, a pinkwashing word for non-democracy eventually, because the equality is not there, it's not part of the equation. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all very